He may decide to be very shy.
But is that an albino painted turtle?
Good question. And I get asked that a lot. And this may make him completely hide, but it will give you a good idea of how well the shell can close up.
Hi everyone, my name's Ranger M, and I work at Catfish Creek Conservation Authority. I'm the community outreach technician, and that means I do a lot of this, chatting about all things nature and conservation with kids, adults, teachers, everyone. I love to knowledge share, and that's just what I'm going to do with you. So come on, let's go learn with Ranger M.
Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about some very cool creatures we can find in the Carolinian life zone. And Scott here is going to help us with that. Scott, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Scott Gillingwater. I'm the Species at Risk Biologist for the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, and this is the end of my 27th year working with reptiles at risk in the Carolinian zone or in southwestern Ontario.
Wow, 27th year, that's awesome. And what's your specialty as a biologist?
Well, my specialty is reptiles at risk. I do a little bit of work with birds and some other species as well. However, reptiles have always been the group of animals that has, I think, spawned the most interest in me, and in a lot of ways have needed more assistance than some of our feathered and furry friends that get a lot of attention.
Can you tell us a bit more about your project at Upper Thames?
So when I got on at 19 years old, there was a contract to survey the entire Thames River and the entire Sydenham River looking for the spiny softshell turtle. There was very little known about it. It was already listed as threatened because there were very few observations. And what we found was that there were very few turtles found, and we also found that the bulk, or pretty much all of the turtles, were adult animals. So that told us that there was something going on. There was either a lack of eggs that were hatching, or young that were surviving to maturity, or the young were in a different area that we didn't survey. And what we found is that invasive species like Japanese hop and invasive Phragmites australis, which is a European reed, were overtaking nest sites. But we also realized that subsidized predators like raccoons and coyotes and stuff like that were taking a lot of nests. And we also realized that flooding and poaching were also issues. So what this meant is we were able to keep applying for funding and keep this project going for a number of years. We were able to develop this into more than just a project for the spiny softshell turtle, an important species that needs work done, but we realized that species such as queen snake, spotted turtle, Blanding's turtle, hognose snake, and the list goes on, were all in the same situation, that their populations were under so much pressure from human problems, human-caused problems, whether it was road mortality, habitat loss, pollution, you name it, it was impacting these species. And it's now one of the longest running and most successful reptile research and education programs in Canada. There was a lot of people that made this happen the way that it did, through volunteers, through support from the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, through funding sources all over the place. And it's always a struggle, it's always an uphill battle, but it's through dedicated people that this has been able to flourish and become the project that it has.
As I also work at a conservation authority, I do know kind of the negative side of things, the challenging side of things, and it's keeping things funded. And like you said, if we want to keep this progression going, we need different areas to maybe start these projects as well. Do you find it just as challenging to keep the funding present for your project?
Yeah, the funding has been the most difficult part. I put in, over the years, it's thousands of volunteer hours of my own on top of what I get paid for. We have many volunteers that come in and provide, that bodies in the field basically to get this work done. But we do need core funding in order for this to move forward. So we have tapped into different foundations, into government funding, and we have private donors. It's limited, but it is core funding to use for matching funding in the future. And the Habitat Stewardship Program for Species at Risk has been an ongoing and very dedicated federal partner for us. And we have been getting provincial funding from the Species at Risk Stewardship Fund or Stewardship Program now. Without that, we would not be able to reach the potential we have.
Now, would you mind showing us some of your equipment for your projects and your fieldwork?
Oh, I'd be happy to.
Okay, we'll do that after the break.
Did you know during the past 2 decades, monarch populations have dropped by more than 80%? Did you know during the past 2 decades, monarch populations have dropped by more than 80%? Monarchs are threatened by deforestation of their winter habitat in Mexico and the loss of native plants along their migratory routes and breeding areas in Canada and the United States.
All right, so the work that I do involves education, but also involves research. And in order to do that research, we need to investigate these species in greater detail. So first and foremost, all the work I do is under provincial permit, and if I work on federal property, it's also under federal permits. So basically, you need the government's permission in order to handle these animals and to do work with them. We want to ensure that the appropriate work is being done, and that's what these permits allow for. So to get started, I'll give you an overview of some of the equipment that we use. It's not all on the table here, but we do have some of the items that we use. So when we locate an animal, we have our GPS unit. We want to get a location of that animal. If we don't know where it was found, it's very difficult to protect an area. And in order to know the animal a little bit better, we do a few things. So I will jump into, marking the animals. So with our hard-shelled species, we may have an animal that is large, or it could be small, and it's the ones with the hard shell that we use a small file in order to file small notches into the back of the shell. So that allows us to put an individual identifying mark on each animal. So when we recapture that animal, we know that it is turtle number 1 or turtle number 23 or turtle number 1504. And with that mark, it should be permanent on the backs of these hard-shelled species. However, that's not something we can do for snakes and for soft-shelled turtles. We need to use another method of marking these animals. So here is a model of a soft-shelled turtle for an example. And we use the back leg of the soft-shelled turtle in order to insert a microchip. And the microchip is very small. It's about the size of a grain of rice, so very, very tiny. And it is inserted into a syringe. And we can scan that syringe with our scanner to ensure that that tag is active, it's not a dud. And this turtle would be known as 132979791A. So not the nicest name, but it allows us to identify that turtle next time we capture it. Each time we capture that animal, we can scan them, and we can find out if that animal was already tagged. So in order to learn a little bit more about these marked animals, we also want to measure them. So we take the weight with a hanging scale, and the animal is in a bag. And we also use calipers. So for the larger species, we use lumber calipers. So these are the same that you'd use for measuring a tree, but they work quite well for measuring a turtle. So we want to get the full extent, so the full length of the upper shell, which is called the carapace. We also want to get the width, and we also want to get the size of the lower shell as well. So in order to do that, we use calipers of various sizes. So large calipers for big turtles, small calipers for small turtles. And with that, we can, again, monitor the growth of that animal over time. We can see that it was maybe 30 centimeters upon first capture, 35 centimeters 8 years later. So in order to understand the environment a little bit better, we also take a temperature of the water, of the air. We look at the clouds, we look at the wind, and we do all of these things in order to understand the habitat and the environment of that animal. So some of the other work that we do is the incubation of turtle eggs. Again, under permit, we find eggs in the wild that are at risk of loss due to drought, due to flooding, due to compaction on roads, or even illegal collection, also known as poaching. So we collect the eggs, we carefully put them in a small bin, and we put them in our incubator. And after about 55 to 65 days, the young hatch out and we're able to release them. That is an extremely simplified version of how this works. There's a lot more that goes into it, and it can be a very almost surgery-like progression of work in order to get these eggs safely from the field into the lab, incubated in the incubator, and released back into the wild. So there's a lot more that goes into the work that we do, but that is a brief overview of some of the effort that we put forward in order to study these animals.
Did you know there's thought to be fewer than 200 American badgers left in Ontario? Did you know there's thought to be fewer than 200 American badgers left in Ontario? These nocturnal creatures are at risk because more and more of our tall grass prairie is being converted into farmland.
So Scott, since your specialty is turtles, can you tell us a little bit about the native turtles we find in Ontario?
Yeah, absolutely. I can talk about our 8 native species of turtle as well as a couple non-native species that we have in the area. So on the table you can see there's a number of shells as well as models. So we'll start with a really unique animal. This is the Blandings turtle. So this is found in the Upper Thames River watershed. It's down in the Long Point region watershed as well. And this species with the bright yellow throat and high domed shell is quite unique. But what also makes it unique is it has a hinge along the lower shell. So this is a model, it's hard to tell, and even on the preserved shell, that hardens up. But if this turtle were alive, you could touch its feet or its head, and it would pull its head and feet inside its shell, and the shell would close like a drawbridge. So if we were to compare that with the northern map turtle, we can see that the opening of the shell is quite wide, and so the mouth of a predator, such as a mink, could easily get in and get at the limbs or the head. I should mention before we stray too far from the Blandings, that is a threatened species in Ontario. The northern map turtle is a species of special concern, and what that means is populations aren't as high as they used to be, but they're not quite threatened yet. So this is an adult female map turtle. So it gets its name from the numerous yellow lines on the shell that kind of look like the contours on a map. And what's unique about this animal is that this is the adult female and this is the adult male. So quite a size difference.
I've never seen the comparison in life. That's amazing.
It is a pretty incredible difference in size. And so we'll jump on over to the snapping turtle because, again, this is an animal that gets very large. So snapping turtles get their name because they do snap in order to protect themselves. And again, I'll use the map turtle as a comparison. You'll see that there's a lot of coverage of shell on the lower part of the map turtle, but on the snapping turtle, there's very little coverage. So there's a lot of skin exposed, legs exposed, and they can't pull their head in the shell as easily as some of our other turtle species, so they're very vulnerable. So if they did not snap out in order to protect themselves, they would be very vulnerable to predation if they got flipped over. And that snapping we call defensive, not aggressive. They're not out to hurt people, but they will snap to defend themselves. I will mention too that the snapping turtle is a species of special concern. Their populations are much lower than they used to be, so we are keeping a closer eye on what's happening. So the spotted turtle is an endangered species in Canada, and it is endangered for a number of reasons. It is small, it is beautiful, it is rare, and so that makes it high on the list for the black market in turtles around the world. You can see it has a black shell with these small little polka dots, and that allows them to actually blend into their aquatic environment.
When you think of poaching, a lot of people think about Asia or Africa, and this happens in Canada and in southern Ontario. This happens here,
Yeah.
and it's just crazy that some of our turtles experience poaching.
Reptiles are the path of least resistance in terms of how much jail time or charges that an individual will get for these crimes. Hopefully, it's changing a bit, but hopefully it will change quicker and sooner because we need to have laws that will protect these animals for the long term. If we continue on along our table of shells, our most common species, this is again the model, is the Midland painted turtle, and this is the shell. So this animal has red along the exterior of the shell. It has yellow and red lines on the skin of the neck and of the legs. And if you were to look closely at the lower shell, you would notice that there's a gray pattern, and that's diagnostic for the Midland painted turtle. So in this area of southern Ontario, it's the most commonly seen turtle because they're avid baskers. You'll see legs sticking out, them piled high on top of each other on logs. And although still relatively abundant in some areas, their populations have also been declining, and we're seeing that there is no turtle safe from those declines.
Well, I have one quick question before you keep going, because it looks like the same shell, but is that an albino painted turtle?
Good question. And I get asked that a lot. So you see the white color of the shell, and immediately one assumes that it's albino or leucistic or hypomelanistic or all of these other weird genetic things that can happen to a turtle. But this is actually a painted turtle that has had the shells or scutes fallen off. So when the animal dies and they start to dry up, the scales again the scutes will pop off. And so this is one where all of the scutes have popped off, and you can see the bone below. So below that protective layer, and I should mention too that the scutes are made of keratin, so the same thing as our fingernails, and it protects them from abrasion in their wetland habitats from rocks and sticks and even bites from coyotes. However, below that protective layer is bone.
Which leads me into another question. A lot of people don't realize that a shell of a turtle, and I noticed it when you were holding up the snapping turtle, is part of their body, and you can see it really well there, the spine.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Turtles cannot escape from their shell, which some people think. Mm-hmm. So a hermit crab can go from shell to shell, but a turtle is intimately tied to its shell. Its spine is just an expanded, or the shell is an expanded spine.
Did you know species like the Jefferson salamander and the snapping turtle are experiencing higher mortality rates because of road mortality? Always pay attention and look for the little guys when driving. Did you know species like the Jefferson salamander and the snapping turtle are experiencing higher mortality rates because of road mortality? Always pay attention and look for the little guys when driving.
Any more turtles?
We do. So I will quickly, we don't have a wood turtle on the table, which is another species that we have in Ontario. I will just quickly mention the musk turtle. This is an adult female that was killed while she was laying eggs by a predator. So you can see how tiny they are. And similar to the snapping turtle, they have a limited lower shell, so they do snap quite a bit. Their alternate name, eastern musk turtle, is stinkpot. So both musk turtle and stinkpot suggests that they release a horrible scent. So when picked up, they do have glands and they release a bad smell to deter predators. They are listed as special concern in Ontario. And I will mention too that we have a couple of species of turtle that now exist in the wild in Ontario, but are released pets. So the first is the red-eared slider. This is the most commonly seen turtle in pet stores. They start off as these cute little green turtles, and they end up as these beautiful big adults, but they eat a lot, they poop a lot, they are very difficult to care for, and people often feel very guilty of having these animals in a small aquarium, so they release them into our waterways. So what we found is that red-eared sliders can survive our winters, and what we've also found is that they are now starting to lay eggs and have successful hatchlings emerge in Ontario. That is probably less of an issue than the potential for disease transfer to our native turtles. So a lot of these animals are kept horribly, and even ones that haven't been, they may harbor parasites or diseases that can impact our native turtles. So never release a red-eared slider into the wild. And so we always try and promote that, and hopefully people take heed, because we don't want to lose our native species due to those diseases. So another turtle that we have in Ontario is kind of a unique situation. So the eastern box turtle is still found occasionally in the wild in Ontario. However, it's listed as extirpated from Ontario. So what that means is it used to occur here, does not anymore, but still occurs in other areas such as New York and Michigan. So why would we find this animal in Ontario if it doesn't occur here naturally? Well, people keep eastern box turtles as pets, similar to the red-eared slider, and many have been released over the years. So both eastern box turtle and three-toed box turtle can sometimes be found in Ontario, but it is the eastern that used to be a native species prior to European settlement. There's still a little bit of debate about that, but there have been portions of the shell found in remains at First Nations archaeological sites, and they may have been traded, but there seems to be enough evidence to suggest that they were here, at least in small numbers in southwestern Ontario. And to show you one that we have here, this is a rescued male eastern box turtle. He may decide to be very shy, but they're a very beautiful species, so you can see why they are often kept as pets, because they're relatively small, very beautiful, and similar to the Blandings turtle we were talking about, they also have a hinge on the lower shell. And this may make him completely hide, but it will give you a good idea of how well the shell can close up.
Wow.
So that gives us at least an overview of what we have in Ontario. So we have 8 species of native turtles, and we have 2 species of currently non-native turtles that can be found in the wild. I think I should probably jump over to the soft-shelled turtle really quickly because
Your favorite.
this is one of my favorites. So at the age of 19, I started working with this animal, and it is such a unique species compared to all of our other turtles because not only does it have a soft, leathery shell, but it also has a long, slender neck, slender head, and slender, long snout. So what this animal does in order to protect itself, it will move very quickly, both on land and in the water, because it has very thick webbing, almost paddle-like feet. And once it hits that water, it will often either swim out into deeper areas, or the smaller individuals will quickly bury into the sand or mud and just extend their neck up through the water column and just the tip of the snout up above the water to breathe. So if you have a soft shell, you need to find other ways in order to protect yourself. And one other defensive strategy is similar to the snapping turtle. If in doubt, snap, claw,
Really?
and
Okay.
then run away. So that is, I think, probably a very brief overview of our turtles.
I'm sure
but
you could go in much detail about all of them.
I could talk for hours, and but I think it just allows people to get an understanding that we have more than just painted turtles and snapping turtles, and most of these species are in very heavy decline and need our help now. So it's our fault that they are in decline, and now it's up to us in order to recover them.
One more question, and probably the most important question. Why should we protect turtles?
Well, I get asked this a lot, and people say that, you know, what difference does it make if a turtle is in the environment or not? If we take a look at a local wetland ecosystem, we can see that turtles not only act as predator, but they're also prey to a lot of animals. So we see their eggs being eaten by many mammals, and we sometimes see that as a bad thing. And that's not necessarily a bad thing that raccoons and other animals are eating turtle eggs, but it is potentially a bad thing if too many raccoons are eating eggs. But it is all part of the natural system. So turtles are predator and prey, and they're a unique part of our local fauna in this area. And I think it's up to all of us to you know, look at ways that we can better their situation.
Mm-hmm. And I know one really big thing about turtles is they eat a lot of the dead stuff in the waterway, and that keeps things clean and going, and really is an important part of the food chain and the ecosystem itself, right?
Exactly. So snapping turtles, I often call them the turkey vultures of our wetlands. They eat a lot of the dead stuff that's out there, and a lot of people sometimes think of you know, animals that eat dead stuff as bad, but they're actually the cleanup crew of our wetlands. They help keep disease down and keep a lot of that you know, dead fish, dead ducks cleaned up. And I think people think it's just snapping turtles doing that, but soft-shelled turtles and Blanding's turtles and pretty much all of our turtles will eat dead matter in our wetland environment.
Okay. Well, Scott, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and telling us all of your fun facts and just your information about not only turtles, but snakes and the benefits of biodiversity within our ecosystems and within our watersheds. So thank you again for joining today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you guys for joining. Happy holidays, and I'll see you in nature.